Coming up on River City Presents, a 1-hour special segment addressing criminal justice reform and more specifically, bail reform in Kentucky. Welcome to River City Presents. My name's Daniel Hurt. We're starting off 2021 this year with a special 1-hour episode addressing bail reform in the criminal justice system in Kentucky. And joining me on the program today will be Samuel Hawkins, a poet, Reverend Dr. Donald Gillett II, who's the Executive Director of the Kentucky Council of Churches, Dr. Ashley Spalding, the Research Director of the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy, Amanda Groves, Pastor and President of the Kentucky Council of Churches, Shabazz, who's a bail disruptor with the Kentucky Bail Project, and Natalie Cunningham, who's the Outreach Director of the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy. We thank you all for joining us today, and let's get started with my friend from Paducah, œSnacksâ Hawkins.
Yes, the name of this poem is called America the Beautiful, and it talks about some of the inequalities within the justice system. So, yeah, I hope y'all enjoy. Honestly, I didn't want to write this, but God planted a fuse in my heart, and the truth will ignite it. Love will enlight it. Listen, this American dream is a birthday party with a Ku Klux theme, and everybody wasn't invited. The guest list, political policies, we need to rewrite it. Maybe then no riots. Maybe then the aching hearts will quiet. Maybe then we can stand together again under a new anthem, flying united. But right now it feels like we're in a plane with no pilot. In the streets, it's going down. But like that same plane filled with textbooks, I'm here to jot you some knowledge. Hope you hear me. Hand over my heart. Should I pledge allegiance or take a knee and file a grievance? Is it justice for all or justice for all who fall under a certain category? Justice system is quite fair if you have the money, power, and influence to fight it. Listen to me. Eric Garner was strangled to death on a New York City corner for selling loose cigarettes. And who you think they indicted? The cameraman. Like, Sway, nah, I ain't got the answers, man. But for real, it feels like I'm in the dog park taking canine gender surveys. Ain't that the whip that cracked the back of our ancestors? I wrote this because my soul was restless. God bless the families affected. They paint your passing loved ones as thugs and drug addicts. Decency has been neglected. What a way to be disrespected. I've been infected. I found myself crying. And if I recall correctly, it's not my family members that are dying, but it feels like it is. Man, true story. I wrote this poem years ago, at least started it for Trayvon Martin, but I scrapped it because my brain said it was bandwagon source material. But how many black bodies had to pile up until enough is enough? And we know Chicago has had it rough, but if Jerome kills Jamal, he's prosecuted to the full extent of the law. But if Officer Paul guns down Jerome, he just becomes another name in a poem. Can we hear the white silence and the violence? Our critics are beginning to sound like crickets, quick to critique and teach us how to protest, but Kate Upton ain't got nothing to say when an unarmed black man takes one to the chest. I guess the national anthem was playing too loud to hear the sound of our souls cracking like burning buildings. Our throats are fire escapes, screaming water, but they tell us to hold our ladders because all houses matter, even though ours is on fire. I guess we'll just have to wait until we're ashes just to watch Justin Timberlake gentrify our soul. I wonder if he worries about being filled up with holes. It's hard to stand for an anthem when you're being shot down, blood blooming like suicide roses on the ground. When we bleed together. Yeah, that's solidarity. Apparently, there isn't enough empathy in this world to go around. And I know this isn't my story, not my narrative, but to speak up for those that can no longer speak for themselves, to feel their pain is imperative. So I hope you take it in. I hope you feel it like an empty water bottle. Because to find solutions, we must first acknowledge that there is a problem. Thank God for listening.
Thank you, Snacks. Very much appreciate that. I always enjoy your work, and it's always good to see you. I understand next we're going to have Reverend Dr. Donald Gillett, who's the Executive Director of the Kentucky Council of Churches. He's going to do an invocation for us.
Greetings. I bring you greetings on behalf of the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy, the Kentucky Council of Churches, and all of our partners as we welcome you in on a conversation of justice through bail reform, faith, and facts. Why are we here? Some of you may want to know. Well, we're here because we are in a season, or we've been in a season, where it's been raining in the lives of people who are being incarcerated and remain incarcerated because they have not had fair and equitable bail hearings across the Commonwealth. Why are we here? We are here because of the inequity in our bail system as part of an inequity of our justice system. Why are we here? So as not to get attached to the illusion of justice. One of two things can happen as we tackle bail reform. We'll either get chewed up in the noise of it can't be done, or there's not enough willpower to get it done, or we can lean forward together and be, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would suggest, drum majors for justice. And that is why we are here today. Our faith leads us to believe in the equity and the dignity of all of God's creation. And it's that human dignity that is being trampled and attacked by the illusions that are put before us of justice. And that is why we need to gain understanding and the truest essence of what is going on with the issues of bail. Today, you'll hear from impacted persons who will share of the inequity and the denial of justice. Today, you will hear from Dr. Ashley fact-based information from data collected across the state, especially Western Kentucky. Today, you will learn of the difficulty of people awaiting trial to receive bail. Today, you will be able to place facts with your faith. It's not right that those who are pre-trial incarcerated are more likely to accept bad plea deals so that they can be released. It's not right that based on nothing but subjectivity that there are some who are held and some who are allowed bail. Today, as people of faith, let's gain a clear understanding that will back our belief, that will propel us into being drum majors for justice and action. Today, I ask that you would open your heart and your minds, our faith and our reasoning, so that we can see justice through bail reform. Let us pray. Most dear and gracious creator God, God who is equitable in all things that God does, we come this day just declaring your will be declared on this place. We ask that you would be with us, that you would guide the leaders and the speakers during this hour of faith and facts. But more than that, we ask that you would get into the hearts and begin changing the minds of those who are so staunchly against doing what is right. We call for righteousness. We call for dignity of all of human creation. Have your way. Be with us even now and forevermore. And I pray this prayer in the name of the one who I know as Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. It's in the name of Jesus we pray. Let us all declare together, amen.
Thank you, Dr. Gillett. Very much appreciate it. This perspective needs to be heard, and I'm happy to be here to allow this platform to take place. One of the issues facing this situation is, with Kentuckians wanting to go to trial, their concern is that presumed innocent by law, they shouldn't have to wait in jail because of the color of their skin, where they live, or whether or not they can afford bail. But these things do shape who is held in pretrial, and their claim is that Kentucky has a disparate justice system that incarcerates far too many people for unjust reasons. And now Dr. Ashley Spalding is going to provide a policy perspective. Ashley, are you ready?
My name is Ashley Spalding. I'm Research Director at the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy. We focus our state data analysis and advocacy work on policies that improve the lives of all Kentuckians. And bail reform is one of the policies we understand to be absolutely critical to our local communities, our economy, and to the state as a whole. I'm going to be speaking generally about what bail is and providing an overview of what's happening in our state. I'll be discussing data specific to several Western Kentucky counties And most of the information in this presentation and some additional data can be found in a report on our website, www.kypolicy.org. And this report is called Disparate Justice. And we published this in 2019. It's based on 2018 data. So this is pre-COVID data that I'll largely be discussing, and then I'll be talking about what has happened more recently. First, let's talk about what bail is, very broadly. When a person is arrested for the majority of crimes, with some exceptions, a judge ultimately decides whether or not a person is released on non-financial conditions, released without having to put forth money. And one of those options is released on recognizance, and that's where someone is released without strings attached, for the most part, and told to come back to court for their court dates. And then on the other hand, a judge can determine that financial conditions are required, that a person needs to pay money bail in order to get out. It could be an amount that they need to pay in full, or they might need to pay 10% down. And then if they don't appear to court, they forfeit this money. As we discuss the process of pretrial incarceration, it's important to remember that these are individuals presumed innocent by law as they are awaiting trial. Bail is intended to prevent people from not showing up to trial by causing them to have money at stake. But in actuality, very few people actually flee. But in Kentucky and many other places, money bail is used to keep people locked up, even though they're unlikely to flee. When making bail decisions, a judge may consider a number of things, including what the prosecutor recommends. The crime a person is being charged with can be a factor, but by law, it cannot be the only factor. Other considerations relate to a person's likelihood of coming to court or being rearrested. Some experts estimate that about 90% of defendants, about 90% of people should be released pre-trial. And that's the case in Washington, D.C. That's what happens, and the vast majority return for their court dates, and they're not rearrested. However, in Kentucky, what we see happening is just 40% of cases statewide result in release on non-financial conditions. This 40% is also the case in Warren County, where we know a group of citizens is working to organize a bail fund so that fewer people in their community are waiting trial behind bars. So they're planning to pay the bail amounts for some individuals. However, pretrial practices vary widely across the state. Looking at just the western part of the state provides an important snapshot of the extreme variation in pretrial practices. McCracken County has by far the very lowest rates of release on non-financial conditions, with just 5% of cases resulting in release without being subject to money bail. And then on the other hand, Barron County has the second highest rate of release on non-financial conditions in the state, at 64% of cases.
So Dr. Spalding, my question is, so every county in Kentucky gets to set that rule themselves?
No, it is, there are statutes that guide how these decisions should be made, but there is considerable discretion in how those statutes are implemented. And so this has to do with judicial decisions. Judges are making decisions, and so what we see is with these numbers is what the data shows us, what decisions are being made in these counties. So this is not a decision that has explicitly been made, a policy has been made. This data shows us what is actually happening across the state. And before we talk more about that data, and that's what our organization contributes to a bail reform campaign, I want to describe the many harms of pretrial incarceration, which gets at why this is such a critical policy issue that needs attention and action, and also explains why we should care so much about what this data shows, about these inequities and about these low rates of release. The pandemic has made very clear how harmful incarceration can be, as we've seen jails and prisons, including in the western part of the state, become hotspots for the spread of COVID-19. But even prior to the pandemic and even beyond the pandemic, pretrial incarceration has severe consequences, whether or not a person is incarcerated pretrial or not. Locking up so many people awaiting trial does not make us safer. And the research shows it could even lead to more crimes being committed down the road, because spending time in jail is so damaging, physically, psychologically, relationally, economically, and more. Being locked up while awaiting trial often means losing a job and separation from family members, including children. Being locked up while supposedly presumed innocent makes a person more likely to plead guilty to a crime, even when innocent. They take a plea deal. And in Kentucky, we don't have strong laws that guarantee a case will go to court in a timely manner if you are incarcerated pretrial. And so people end up being in jail, incarcerated, awaiting trial for a very long time. That happens. And even if a person takes their case to trial, if they've been incarcerated while awaiting trial, they're more likely to be found guilty. And that criminal conviction, from a plea deal or otherwise, especially if it's a felony conviction, has absolutely devastating collateral consequences on a person's ability to get a job, especially a decent one, on housing, on health, on children and families. Research shows that in pretrial decisions, African Americans are often treated more harshly than white defendants. And we know that the justice system, the criminal legal system, I should say, is generally harsher on Latino and Hispanic people as well. And all of these points I've been making are from research that is it's well documented in research, and it is cited within our disparate justice report that's available on our website. So going back to the data, this map shows the variation in pretrial release across the state and highlights how arbitrary and unjust it is. The lighter shaded counties are where there are low rates of release without money bail, such as in McCracken County. And I've put several Western Kentucky counties, their information up there. So it is the lowest rate of release without financial conditions in the state of McCracken County, and which means it's the place where you're most likely to be incarcerated pretrial if you're arrested. And the dark blue counties are where there's much higher rates of release, such as in Barron County. I previously mentioned that the rate of release on non-financial condition in Warren County, you can see, is 40%, and then you can see Davies, it's 52%. It's really notable, I want to point out that Marshall County here, which borders McCracken County, has a 51% rate of release on non-financial conditions. So you're more likely to be incarcerated pre-trial depending on which side of the county line you're arrested on. For many Kentuckians, money bail is just not affordable. Overall in Kentucky, just 39% of cases subject to money bail resulted in release pre-trial, meaning these folks were able to come up with a way to pay their bail. The lightest blue counties in this map are those with the lowest rates of release for those subject to money bail, while the darker blue counties have higher rates of release for those subject to money bail. So I've listed out there on the slide what you see in these select Western Kentucky counties. You know, keeping in mind that in Barron County, the majority of cases are not subject to money bail at all. Note that in the darkest blue county there, that's Hawkins County, 99% of cases subject to money bail result in release. And you can see, looking at the state as a whole, that is very unusual. So let's talk a little bit more about who is incarcerated pretrial in Kentucky. We have a snapshot from the Administrative Office of the Courts, where they looked at data from November 1st, 2018, and they analyzed who was incarcerated that day at pretrial. The most common, most serious charge for those awaiting trial was drug possession, followed by low-level property crimes. I was able to look at the county level data for that snapshot that day, and that carries forth. That is also the case in McCracken County, in Davies, and in Warren as well. Now, Barron's a little different because you'll recall that very few people are incarcerated pretrial in Barron County, so it was just a few people to look at that day. So I can't speak to trends there. Now, in response to the pandemic, the state expanded what is known as administrative release, the administrative release program, and which mandates release for most low-level offenses. This was done through a series of Supreme Court orders that started April 14th, 2020. So administrative release, or AR, as you can see on the slide, it started back in 2015 in several counties and then became required across the state in 2017.
What constitutes low-level offenses?
Thank you. So before the Supreme Court order in April, administrative release was required for misdemeanors, almost all misdemeanors that were non-violent, non-sexual in nature. And with the Supreme Court orders, a series of them, that has been expanded to Class D felonies, the lowest level felony, that are non-violent and non-sexual in nature. So that Supreme Court order has expanded the charges for which a person is automatically released pretrial in most cases. It's not just based on charge, but that's primary. And so when we were looking at the low level, at the felony theft, in looking at that snapshot from 2018, and a lot of people were incarcerated pretrial for felony theft and for drug possession. In most cases, those individuals are going to be released through administrative release right now. There's no end date set for now on this expansion, but it's not necessarily permanent.
What kind of response have you seen from law enforcement with regard to this topic? In some research I've read, there are some concerns that they have about, if they let someone out, they might go out and commit another offense if it's a burglary, for example, as it's occurred in other states. I just want, for the sake of argument, to see what response would you have for that?
Well, what we have seen, the Administrative Office of the Court's data, they provided a report out in August about how things were going, and then we've been able to see data that goes through November 30th of 2020. And 89% of cases released through administrative release due to the pandemic, starting in April, 89% have not been rearrested. And then the August report out that the Administrative Office of the Courts provided to the state legislature provided an analysis of the crimes that, individuals, the small share that were rearrested, what levels of crimes, and they were typically low-level crimes. And again, they're only certain arrests that qualify for administrative release, as we've been talking about. So what we're seeing is that the vast majority of individuals who are released through administrative release, even with this expansion, that they are not being rearrested. So this shows that we can expand the number of people released pretrial while not compromising public safety and even improving on it, given the harms of incarceration. As I mentioned, there hasn't been an end date set on this expansion of administrative release, and these changes, given what we're seeing, should be made permanent through legislation, along with other needed changes to state statutes related to pretrial release to limit which cases could be subject to money bail, and also keep people who end up incarcerated pretrial from languishing in jail. We've been describing the many individual, family, and social costs of pretrial incarceration. But I also want to mention that it's really expensive to counties to incarcerate people pretrial. It's the counties that pay for all the costs of pretrial incarceration. The former Secretary of the Justice Cabinet, Secretary John Tilley, testified that in 2016, 37,000 Kentuckians assessed as a low or moderate risk were held before trial for an average of 109 days at a cost of over $100 million to local governments. It's important to note that many of our counties, as part of thinking about this, are at a critical juncture with jail overcrowding, even during the pandemic, including in the western part of the state.
So it's not just a health concern because of COVID, but it's also a financial strain on local government.
It's a financial strain, yes, and that financial strain, as I want to talk some about, it can decrease health in our communities because there's less to invest in important services and supports for people in our communities. I wonder, is this, based on everything that I've been describing, is this what we want our counties to invest in? What if we spent that money on substance use treatment and mental health services in the community instead? The state level data shows that for people who do get out of jail in Kentucky while awaiting trial, they largely come back to court and are not rearrested. When people need supports to make it to court dates and to address underlying substance use disorders, they should be connected to those services rather than incarcerated. And there was testimony by the Vera Institute of Justice to Kentucky legislators last year where several county level initiatives in other states were highlighted that showed that they have really effectively connected individuals who are arrested and in need of services to these services in their communities, rather than having them stay incarcerated pre-trial. And those include Bexar County, Texas, and Johnson City, Iowa, were two of the examples cited in this testimony. As a state, we need to address the unjust practice of locking the majority of people up pre-trial, with only those who can afford to pay getting out. We need to move forward with bail reform. Been talking about state level data, but I want to move to talking about some recently published data on the outcomes of pretrial reforms in other states that shows these policy changes have had positive outcomes. There was a recent report by the Prison Policy Initiative highlighting several states and localities that have enacted reforms and that released more people pre-trial and did not see a decline in public safety. And there was an in-depth study of Cook County, Illinois, and that's where Chicago is, and about reforms related to reforms that took place in 2017 in that county that resulted in fewer people being eligible for money bail. So the study found that the order that did this increased the percent and number of people released pre-trial and had no effect on new criminal activity or crime. The order also reduced the financial burden on defendants by $31.4 million over just a 6-month period, which had the most dramatic impact on Black defendants. It's important to point out that the Illinois General Assembly just passed important statewide bail reform legislation. But we also have examples in our own state that show it is possible and beneficial to release more people pre-trial. For instance, the high rates of release on non-financial conditions in Barron County and the data I presented regarding the expansion of administrative release in response to the pandemic and how that's going. We can also learn a lot from the work of the Bail Project in Kentucky about what's possible when people are provided with the ability to be released pre-trial and receive supports. And you'll hear from Savvy about that work a little later on in the program. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for your presentation. Next, we are going to have Miss Amanda Groves, who's a pastor. She's going to give us a faith perspective of why these organizations are advocating for these positions.
It's always good to see you, Daniel. It's always good to see you. On behalf of the Kentucky Council of Churches, an ecumenical body comprised of 16 Christian judicatories, 12 faith traditions, and more than 1,100 churches from across our Commonwealth, and as someone who proudly claims Western Kentucky as her home, I thank you for your participation in this important conversation that we are having concerning the unfair practice of cash bail. In Luke chapter 4, verses 18 and 19, Jesus proclaims the purpose of his ministry for the world. He says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." It is through programs like this that the purpose of Jesus is being accomplished even today. Our eyes, ears, hearts, minds, and souls are being opened to the oppression that these unfair policies are placing upon individuals, families, and communities in our midst. We can no longer plead ignorance and turn a blind eye to what is really going on behind the doors of our county jails and our courthouses under the guise of freedom and justice for all, because it is not for all, but only the ones who have the resources to pay the price of the bail. It is my prayer that the Spirit of the Lord is anointing us to pick up our cross and be the mouth, hands, and feet of our Lord today. We must stand up and proclaim the good news of Jesus on behalf of the poor, who, as we are learning, are the ones who are in prison for extended period of times, not because of crimes they have committed, but because they lack the funds and the means to pay their bail. And as a result, they lose their homes and their livelihood. Their families lose their son, daughter, mother, father, brother, sister. Their church loses their deacon, Sunday school teacher, choir member, and their community loses their gifts and their talents. The good news is that it does not have to be this way. The good news is that there are tried and proved policies that can be enacted that will ensure freedom and justice for all. Praise be to God. And as we are all aware, oppression doesn't happen in a vacuum. When some of us are oppressed and marginalized, we are all damaged. Because like our state motto says, united we stand, but divided we fall. So let this be the year that we are the instruments of societal healing for our Commonwealth. This be the year that the purpose of Jesus's earthly ministry is more fully realized day by day through our proclamation and action for the abolition of cash bail policies that only benefit the few that can afford to pay them. Let this be the year where we declare to the heavens, somebody's hurting our Commonwealth, and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore. Amen.
Thank you, Amanda, as always. It's always good to see you. You're always passionate about what you believe in, and I think that's great. Always engaging in some good trouble, as they say. I do have a question for Dr. Spalding. With regard to these reforms that you all are passionately pursuing, what are the odds, or what do you think the odds are of having any real significant change with the state legislature in Frankfort?
There is a lot of there are a lot of advocates who are pushing for these reforms. There's a lot of momentum in our state around the need to pass bail reform legislation. At the same time, in this current legislative session, this is a 30-day session, a budget session in the middle of a pandemic, and so there's a lot that needs to be accomplished. So we're really looking at this as a longer-term goal than this specific session, and we're really glad to see that this expansion of administrative release is in place currently. So right now, more people are being released, To sustain that and build on that, we need to see bail reform happen in the near future.
And because of the pandemic, you're sort of seeing them take extra precaution, and people are being out of the jail system, being allowed to get out because of that, for safety reasons.
I know Savvy will talk more in a bit, but certainly we've seen an increase in that. But there are many people who are continue to be incarcerated pretrial just because they can't pay bail, and they are in a very dangerous situation. And we've seen outbreaks in our jails as well as our prisons.
Thank you. And Natalie, how can people get involved in this process if they'd like to do that?
We would encourage people to really support projects like the Bail Project. And I would love to hear Savvy be able to talk a little bit about what that project does in the state and for our citizens who are having to deal with bails that are set entirely too high for them to be able to pay.
All right, let's bring Savvy in. Savvy, you there?
Greetings, everyone. Thank you for having me on. My name is Shabazz. I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm a client advocate with the Bail Project. The Bail Project is a national organization that combats the incarceration by disrupting the money bail system. We do this one person at a time. We try our best to restore the presumption of innocence as well. And we also try to reunite families and challenge a system that actually criminalizes people through poverty and race. One of the biggest things with us, we're on a mission to end cash bail, and we're not just trying to do that in the state of Kentucky and in Louisville. Like I said, we're a national organization. We just want to create a more just and equitable and humane pretrial system. Because bail is a return at the end of the case. So what's the real issue? We get the bail back at the end of the case. And that's one of the biggest things with it. A lot of people during the pretrial, they can't afford cash bail. You personally, you go through a system, you ask personal questions, who you are, where you live, do you have a job, do you have a savings account, how much do you have in the savings account, how much do you get paid, and so on. And at the end, I remember one of the big questions was, so how much do you think that everything that you have is worth? I've seen people say $200 and they get a $10,000 bond. Like that's not equality, So that's one of the things we're trying to end. We've seen people maybe miss fines in a total of $150. Come and get her from the house. No one's there to watch the children. Now her kids are CPS is called in. Loss of job, loss of apartment, missed a car payment. It just becomes a disaster. We feel like that it's unnecessary, and it's something that we're trying to remove not only in the state of Kentucky, but throughout the nation as well.
I suppose it's clear that, if you've been arrested and you're being held and you can't go back to work, you're going to lose your job. And when you lose your job, the question is, okay, now I'm unemployed. How am I supposed to provide for my family and survive the fight against poverty even if you weren't in it before, I suppose you could be in it now because of however long that you're in it, however long you're being held, right?
Yes, that's one of the other issues. We've seen people just since COVID. We've seen people get arrested in May. They set their court dates for September and October. And they're just sitting in there with $100, $200 bail, $500 bail. And these are people that need to be home in their communities and back with their families as well. So it's a real issue here in the state of Kentucky and nationally as well.
And being held so if you are in jail, if you're held in jail, of course, with COVID going on, as we've talked about before with Dr. Spalding, that if you're being held in jail for however long, you're in there with a pool of people. And if you have an underlying health condition, regardless of whatever consequence you've been arrested, as long as it's nonviolent, of course, you're taking a risk of being infected in a large pool or a large gathering of people.
Exactly. It's being incarcerated, and even with the local jails, and even with the state level institutions as well, it's a cesspool. There's no such thing as social distancing when you're incarcerated. It just doesn't exist.
Is there any, and anybody can answer this, is there anybody, what work have you all done in cooperation with the law enforcement community? Because of course they're on the other side of this. They're the ones that are enforcing the law and are making arrests. So what communications have you all had with folks over in law enforcement?
One of the things when COVID back in April, we had met with some city officials. We had met with the mayor, and he had put out an order as far as some of the stipulations as far as arresting people. I think that from my experience and the work that I do, I think that probably lasted all of 30 to 60 days. I think we're right back to the numbers that we were at about this time last year. The lowest number I can remember that we got, I remember watching the numbers, was maybe 1239. It's like it always fluctuates between, that was the lowest number, but it's always over 1250 for some reason. And I think we're actually at 1300 at this time right now.
What about local bail funds? Are there any organizations or anything pushing for local bail funds or anything like that?
So there is a Louisville Community Bail Fund here. We have a pretty good relationship with them. What I try to do with them, what we can't do, we try to push those cases over to that organization, and they usually take care of those
Is that just
cases as well.
Kentucky-based?
No, if I'm not mistaken, I can only speak for the one I'm aware of here in Louisville, but I'm thinking that there are community bail funds across the nation as well in different locations.
There are some, and maybe Natalie's going to speak to this. I think that there are some communities that are working to organize community bail funds, including one in the western part of the state, but may not be fully up and running just yet.
Certainly, Natalie, can you speak to that?
They are on their way. They are on their way. I believe they're calling themselves as the Warren County Bail Fund Collective. And they are hoping to roll out publicly in the spring, but do not have an online presence as of yet. So we were hoping to get them on here, but they are a fully volunteer organization and are still working to get everything ready for their rollout.
Well, I know that originally there had been hope that we would have a guest on who could be a testimonial to some of the stuff that you all are talking about. Would you all like to, or Dr. Spalding or Natalie or whoever, would you all like to talk about maybe examples of people not using their names necessarily? You can give me real life examples of how they are impacted.
Well, I think the research I described shows the impacts, and Natalie was able to reach out to someone who had been interested in sharing her story, but those are very personal decisions and personal stories. So I'll just say that the research really shows the trends, and I really appreciate Savvy filling in information that he did about how when we think about what is affordable, it's very relative terms. So.
Well, and I think too, back to what Savvy had said earlier, when someone's picked up in May and their court date is set for September, October, it's very clear how that can interrupt someone's life and, what they're going to have to deal with when and if they do get out, and the pressure that it puts on someone to take whatever kind of deal they can to go ahead and be released, which sets them up for more issues later on in life. And so I think that what we do know is that this affects people in all parts of their lives and is an incredibly unjust way for us to continue in our justice system in Kentucky.
So, when you look at it, it impacts people, but it impacts communities as well. Mm-hmm. It impacts the communities, it impacts the children, it impacts the parents. And so a lot of times it's kind of used to get people to make plea deals that are not in the best interest so that they can get out, so that they can care for their families or continue to keep their jobs. And so it's unfair and it's unjust in all of its applications.
Yes, I remember, I guess it was last year, I had the privilege of being in the presence of Reverend Dr. William Barber II, who came down to Eddyville, to the Kentucky State Penitentiary down there, and he led a protest outside. In fact, I recall it so well. He was speaking with a megaphone, and of course the local police had shown up, but the prisoners who were in the prison yard had came over and they were leaning up against the fence trying to hear his message. And I remember feeling that was a very moving experience. And of course, that was part of that bus tour that everybody was a part of last year, but when we could be around each other and not have to look at each other through screens like this. Someday that kind of fellowship, of course, will happen again. But I mean, people like that taking the lead on that, would having someone like him come back when COVID's over, or when things have calmed down, do you all have plans to bring people like him back to the fold to make the case for bail reform in Frankfort?
Well, I do know that our friends at the Kentuckians for the Commonwealth organization, KFTC, are really the heads of that Poor People's Campaign that Dr. Barber heads up. And so I know that they are connected with him on a regular basis and would hope to be able to bring him back to Kentucky soon, if that's in the cards for them. But we do know that we will be talking about this for a while, because it is an issue that is incredibly important to Kentucky. It's important to our citizens, our friends, our neighbors, and our communities. And so we will be talking about this until change happens, until we can see some things happen in Frankfort.
And let me add, it's great to bring in persons like Dr. Barbara, who can speak from a nationwide perspective. But once again, we have to continue educating persons here in the Commonwealth, because it's up to us getting our voices out and us being a collective, us being drum majors for justice, so that the legislation can hear, whether it's a short session or an extended or a regular longer session, that we have to continue moving about. The Kentucky Poor People's Campaign will continue to stay involved and have a voice as well as Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, so that this issue can begin to stay in the forefront of our minds and not get chewed up because of folks saying it can't be done or there's not a will to have it done. But for me, as a person of faith, I know God's will is greater than any person's will. And so therefore, we will continue to educate, and we will continue to allow persons to come together over this common cause of injustice.
Well, and I would love to back up Reverend Gillett when you say, if the will is there. And we believe that we have the will, that the people of Kentucky have the will for justice, and especially people of faith in our state have the will to have justice happen. And I feel like the really important thing to say right now is, if you feel like you want to see that happen, then you need to call your legislator. You need to let them know that this is important to you, because that will of our legislature is completely run by your will as the people of Kentucky. And so what we really need you to do is go to legislator.ky.gov. If you don't know how to contact your legislator, you can find that information there. Again, that's legislature.ky.gov. But if you just Google LRC, you're going to be able to find it that way as well. And we do ask that you connect with those local and statewide decision makers and tell them that there's no reason that people should be kept incarcerated before trial while they're presumed innocent just because they can't afford their bail.
Indeed, and on this show that I've had the privilege of doing for a few months now, I always remind people, anytime I have a political guest on who's run for office, I always remind people that they need to vote in November, because it is their voice that matters, and they're the ones that can impact the people who serve in Frankfort or Washington, D.C. And so, you know, I say that again, even in organizations like your all's, who's advocating for the moral cause of bail reform. You know, I certainly think that that's, anytime I can tell people, you impact the people who serve you in Frankfort, and if you agree with this message, you should definitely check out these organizations and make sure you vote and lobby your state lawmakers, because in Paducah and McCracken County, where we tape this show, State Representative Randy Bridges is the member of the House of Representatives for the city of Paducah. Other lawmakers, depending on where you live in McCracken County, are Stephen Rudy and Richard Heath, and then in State Senate is Danny Carroll. So if you have any issues with them, you can find them on the LRC website at the KentuckyLRC.gov, and you can lobby them. You can go to Frankfort or call their offices or whatever you want to do. but we're about out of time. Is there anything that you all would like to add before we go?
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I think my colleagues really have done a good job summing it up, so I don't have anything to add.
All right. Well, I want to thank Samuel Hawkins for his poetry today, and then Reverend Dr. Donald Gillett. I'd like to thank Dr. Ashley Spalding of the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy, Amanda Groves, our famous Reverend, and Shabazz and Natalie Cunningham for the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy. Appreciate all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we'll hope to have you back. And those are my guests from the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy, the Kentucky Council of Churches, and the Bail Reform Project. We'll hope you join us next time. Thank you.